Dzień dobry, everyone. I have a confession to make. I didn't know that there were Polish video game. Well, I know that they had game in Poland, but what I'm trying to say is that I cannot name any of them. I don't know any game that is made in Poland. And I grew up in the 90s with the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo, and I'm curious to see if there's all games that I used to play that were actually invented in Poland, because I have no idea of any game that is from Poland. This guy living ironically in Europe is saying that the Polish video games are different. So I don't know what he means by different, in a good or a bad way, but we're about to find out. Yes, let's go.
This video is sponsored by War Thunder. This is Poland. 30 years ago, it was a poor post-Soviet country, where computers were rare and video games were basically contraband. Today, it's one of Europe's richest nations, and the fourth largest exporter of video games on Earth. But how did Poland go from communist poverty to building some of the most influential games of the 21st century? Well, we first have to look at The
Witcher is Poland? Was that The Witcher?
It's the 60s. Three pot-smoking, ramen-munching creatures, better known as college students, unraveled their first ever invention at MIT, Space War! Instead of crunching numbers or helping put people on the moon, they made triangles shoot at each other. It was the world's first video game. At the time, computers were absurdly expensive. They filled entire rooms and cost more than most houses. They were tools for scientists, governments, and people who wore lab coats, unironically. Games were the last thing anyone expected them to run. But once Space War existed, the idea was out. If computers could play games, people...
It's one of the first games that I play on the computer. It's funny, I'm in the generation, I grew up in the 90s, where the first computer for human were invented, and these were some of the arcade games that you could play on your computer, actually, growing up.
We're going to make
I don't
more.
remember the name of this.
Over the next 2 decades, computers got smaller, cheaper, and faster. By the late 1970s, companies started building machines whose only purpose was entertainment. Consoles. In a couple of decades, video games conquered the world. Everywhere from the suburbs of the Midwest to the ex-nuclear wastelands of Japan.
I know all of these games, by the way. I play all of these games.
Kids were glued to their screens, mashing buttons. Everywhere except Eastern Europe. Video games were fun, but you know who hates fun? Communists. So, much like blue jeans, rock music, and actually good literature, import of video games in the Soviet Union and its satellite states was banned. So, while kids in America were blasting Space Invaders at home, kids in Poland were stuck finding entertainment the old-fashioned way. But this started to change in the 80s. Some people said, screw that, jumping the border into Western Europe and starting to secretly import consoles into the Soviet world. Computers and pirated video games slowly started entering the Eastern European market. Kids and teenagers became enamored with this new technology. So much so that in 1985, Poland launched its first ever magazine entirely dedicated to computers and games. But then in 1991, the unthinkable happened. The Soviet Union collapsed. Overnight, communism was gone and Eastern Europe became free. Computers started flooding Poland. The digital age had finally begun. Which meant War Thunder was just around the corner. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. You want to explore the horrors of war from your own bedroom without the horrors? Well, now you can, from just your PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile. We're talking about
I receive a lot of email
planes,
like this
helicopters,
to promote
10
games,
major nations.
but 95% are scammers, so I'm always hesitant to put ads like this on our video, on my video.
In 3 distinct modes. Arcade for those craving fast-paced matches with more chaos.
Pay well, though.
Simulator mode if you really want to try hard on the battlefield.
You can go check
and
this link if you like video game.
The perfect middle ground. Become totally realistic
I don't know this
graphics,
game.
in depth. What are you waiting for? Come and join a worldwide community of over no players, including the exclusive of pre. Although Poland finally got access to video games, there was a problem. Most people were broke. Consoles and video games cost a lot of money. Maybe not to you watching this from your comfy bedroom in Chicago while eating Cheetos, but to the average Pole, affording a console was the same as affording a Bugatti. So most kids were still far away from being able to crush turds on the Game Boy. But they were able to find a loophole. Computers. Unlike consoles, which only specialized in one thing, computers could do a bunch of stuff. Your taxes, look up questionable websites, and most importantly, run video games. As the country's education system adapted to the new digital age, using computers became a more integrated part in the school's curriculum. Thus, Polish kids were able to convince their parents to get them one. And so, in a couple of years, every little Pole was oiling up their keyboards with their pierogi-greased hands. Although they had access to something that could run video games, which games they could play was still limited. So, to entertain themselves, many...
Damn, Counter-Strike has been popular since over 20 years, if not more. When I was young.
Started fiddling with the computers themselves. Polish kids were learning the ins and outs of their machines, every circuit in their motherboards, every digit in the binary, every pixel on their screen. Paired with the fact that the socialist schooling system heavily pushed for math proficiency meant that in a matter of a couple of years, Poles became computer prodigies. By the early 2000s, many of Poland's biggest game developers emerged. CD Projekt Red.
Hey. When you don't have something, right? You don't have access to something, and suddenly you get access to something that it's so extraordinary to you. You will become good at it. You will love it because you know what it's like to not have much. So I feel like it kind of makes sense, and it's not the only country. You give them the opportunity, you give them access to things that they could not even dream of, and suddenly the people in Poland became good at it, and it's obvious when we think about it.
The most notable company responsible for the Witcher franchise and Cyberpunk 2077. Techland, its other heavy hitter as well. A lot of Poland's early games were more simple in nature and more like
I remember this game. Oh my god, I remember this game. This game broke your brain, right? It gets super harder the more you go with this game because it's like some kind of puzzle, right?
Early games were more simple in nature and more alike to indie games than to the AAA titles we see today. Hell, a lot didn't even make their own games initially, but were studios that worked on outsourced jobs from Western developers. Yet again, Western civilization is upheld by the Polish workforce.
Dead by daylight.
But with a population that was thoroughly passionate about computers and digital goods, video games and game development only grew in popularity. Today, it is estimated that out of Poland's population of 380 million, 20 million play video games as a hobby. But that doesn't include babies and boomers with one foot in the grave, meaning that the vast majority of Poles are gamers. What's even more interesting, half of its gaming population is made up of women. A true pair.
Is that true? It's the first video that I react to, like Poland and video game. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think that if you talk about half the population, by the way, it's not 380 million, I think you just made that up. Half the people play video game? That seemed kind of insane.
Paradise for every GameStop customer. This interest in the digital arts only grew as video games became more popular and more advanced. Polish developers had a vast selection of a well-educated and computer-passionate workforce to pick from. More importantly, they also had a large domestic market to which they could sell their games with a sticker made in Poland. The government and universities took note of this. Over the next decade, they rapidly expanded on this new emerging specialty. Universities opened up dozens of new courses and degrees relating to game development. So much so.
Yeah, do you know what's sad about that is that these kind of jobs are getting extinct now because now AI can make full-blown music video. AI can make games too, can make website. A lot of these jobs now, it's basically you using AI to do something rather than you doing it yourself. A lot of these jobs that you show on screen now, AI are getting so much better at coding. Basically, you are just an assistant, and it's sad, but it's make everything quicker to make that way.
that today there are over 60-degree courses in making games in Poland. This only fueled the country's exponential growth.
It's always about AI now.
By 2019, the country surpassed the UK, Germany, and France in game exports, becoming the dominant game development country on the continent. On average, Poland creates over 500 games each year. The Polish government even added this War of Mine, a game depicting the siege of Sarajevo made by 11-bit studios, to the recommended reading list. This is the first time a country has recommended a video game in their national education system. But just making a large quantity of games is no recipe for success. The Steam discovery page is filled with thousands of newly published games that on average have the same entertainment value as watching paint dry. No, what made Poland's games stand out from the rest is their originality, rich cultural heritage, and immense world building. The two traditional video game epicenters of the world are America and Japan, so it comes as no surprise that America, being the cultural export powerhouse they are, dominated the video game market that showcases American and Western culture and history. From historic shooters like Call of Duty through medieval fantasies like Skyrim to sandbox criminal simulators like GTA, most games are influenced by the Western Hemisphere. Even studios like From Software prominently showcase Western medieval history and mythology. Polish games, on the other hand, introduced whole new fictional worlds based off of their own culture and mythos. What made The Witcher so successful wasn't its gameplay nor technical advancement, it was its world. The game wasn't filled with stereotypical goblins and orcs you find in every fantasy story in Japan and America.
It used to be like this too with the original World of Warcraft classic, right? Where it was all about the immersive experience. But now more and more games are about how much revenue you can make rather than making the game sustainable for a long time.
World was inhabited.
It's more like what we call pay to win that became very popular in China, where games are free or basically free, but you always pay within the game to advance. And it make it a lot less enjoyable when everything become pay to win. Those gacha game and all of that.
By creatures from Slavic mythology like the Striga, Leshen, and the Drowners. The towns you walked through weren't those of medieval Britain or Germany. They had their own unique Polish flair. Even with indie titles like Darkwood, where you play in 90s Poland being corrupted by an evil and mysterious force, these little cultural injections made these games stand out from the rest. Of course, not all Polish games are about their culture. Their own unique life experiences and sense of game design bring a much needed freshness to the gaming scene, no matter the genre or theme. So it's really no surprise that by 2024, Poland has climbed to the world's 6th largest exporter of video games and 4th largest in 2019, single-handedly carried by the release of The Witcher 3. Which is mind-blowing considering the population of other countries on this list. As a whole, Poland's video game industry is worth over $14 billion, with CD Projekt Red accounting for more than half of the industry's total worth. What's even more impressive is the fact that in the entire country, only 10,000 people work in the game development industry. Essentially, a village of Poles were able to become the 4th biggest in the industry in the entire world. Gaming and game development as a whole have become so big in Poland that the government has proclaimed the industry as a source of national pride. In recent years, they've also allocated over $77 million in subsidies to small game studios in an effort to boost this industry even further. In just the past 5 years, the game development industry in the country grew over 250%. Ultimately, Poland's game industry is a testament to the nation's success as a whole. Just a couple of decades prior, the country was a typical desolate Eastern European country struggling to procure basic goods. But in a matter of a couple of years, the nation has become a giant in one of the most popular and influential industries of the 21st century. This isn't just a huge economic milestone, but a cultural one as well. Polish culture, history, and legends are being put on the world's map, and hopefully their creativity and prosperity in game development only continues. Again, thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video.
I want to see the same video in 5 years. Let me know what you think in the comment below, yes.